What we do here is go back.
So my guest today is Jessica Rhodes, who is the co-owner and the founder of Interview Connections, podcast booking agency and extraordinaire. And looks like we're getting some people jumping back in. So Jessica, let's kind of go back a little bit. We'll bring everybody up to speed. And so tell us a little bit about Interview Connections, how that started.
I'm just going to share this in my group to get us some more exposure.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, we could definitely do that. Yep, we could definitely do that.
Thank you guys so much for your flexibility here.
Yep, exactly.
All right, perfect. So.
Yep, exactly. So
really how Interview Connections got started, for those of you joining us, I had my first child in 2013 and I wanted to be home. I was working at a nonprofit organization and I really just when I got pregnant and wanted to, kind of shift my life, I talked to my dad about wanting to be a stay-at-home mom and he told me about being a virtual assistant. And so that's what I started doing. I started a work from home business called Entrepreneur Support Services, which is still our work from home, or that's still our corporate name. I started booking my dad for interviews on podcasts. He was my first client. And then he referred some other clients to me as well. And that was really the start of it. Is I just started doing it for some clients on a freelance basis. And then it's just grown from there.
Yeah, excellent. And so as you're doing that and you're developing that particular business, Jessica, I was always curious as I was reading on it. And for someone that podcast, obviously I have a great appreciation for what you do because you're able to provide folks like myself and many others with phenomenal podcast guests and people that we can showcase and get really good content from. But, how did that evolve as you launched the business? You launched the business, you're reaching out to people. Some people will probably understand because you were so early on that some people probably didn't even know what you were asking them to do or what it really meant. And so walk us through those early times and then how did that evolve as podcasting as an industry evolved?
There were a lot of people hosting podcasts at the time when I was starting Interview Connections in 2013, not as many as there are today. So, but there was nobody else that was doing podcast booking and connecting people for interviews. So when I was reaching out to hosts to pitch my clients to them or reaching out to potential guests for my clients' podcast, it was really people they were like, oh, what do you do? Wait, do you do this for people? Is this a service that you provide? And I remember in May of 2013, I reached a point where I had been doing my virtual assistant business for several months. I was billing hourly, like a virtual assistant, I was doing 12-hour a month contracts, stuff like that. And I reached a point where I'm like, okay, I want to scale and I want to be able to make more money without just increasing my hourly rate or working more hours. And that's when I started Interview Connections. And I remember actually having phone calls with some of the hosts that I had been pitching because I wanted to know, is this a service that you would pay for? Because nobody had been doing it before. So it wasn't a proven concept. And it wasn't a model that had been being done because there were obviously PR agencies and stuff like that, but it was a totally different model because I was charging guaranteeing certain bookings as opposed to having a retainer where we would do a certain number of, outreach to all these different media outlets. So it was really new. And so I know when you, for example, when you want to run for office, you do research and you figure out is this going to work? Is there going to be enough support? What should my platform be? And that's really kind of the approach I took before I started the business was I reached out and I asked hosts, would you pay for this? Is this needed? What price point do you think makes sense? So
Yeah.
I got some of that initial information before I then made the investment to like build the website and come up with the logo and all that.
Gotcha. And I love what you do that because I do that a bit too, Jessica. When I start a new venture, I love to survey who my target customer, kind of that DNA of who do I really want to be
Right.
doing business with and get their feedback and then customize your business around that feedback. I think is always smart. And I always encourage people when I'm coaching them or even counseling
And I
in
think
some
it's
cases
and
to
I
do
think
that
that's
with their
so
business.
important to get feedback because a lot of times people get stuck in like analysis paralysis and they kind of like just think
Right.
and just like brainstorm and try to come up with the perfect, model. And our business coach, Kelly Roach, always talks about like take imperfect action because you can't improve something until you actually start. And I had a consulting call with a client yesterday and I was giving him feedback like on his landing pages and his consult calls and how he's delivering a call to action on his podcast interviews. But the thing I always ask is, I'm like, do you have data? Like, how many people are converting? Like, how is this doing? Because at the end of the day, like, I can give you advice, you can get advice from other people, but what do the numbers say? Like, is it actually working? What is your actual, like, the numbers don't lie,
Right.
which is, like, the great thing about numbers and data is, like, metrics don't lie. So at the end of the day, like, you want to just put something into action to actually test it and see how the market responds.
Yeah, definitely. And again, I totally agree with that because it's a great way to get the type of information that then you can go act on. And like you say, not have the analysis paralysis that you speak to, because that's a term that I use quite a bit. And so, talk a little bit, Jessica, about the type of entrepreneurs or business owners that are best for podcast interviewing. I'd imagine, it may not be something that's for everybody. And so, who do you see gets the most value out of it? And then who do you see, quite frankly, that commits? Because one of the things to get that value is you have to commit to actually doing it. Sometimes entrepreneurs and business owners are bad about the opposite end of analysis paralysis, which is taking small sample sizes and saying, you go and you interview with one podcast and you don't get 1,000 leads until you say, oh, that doesn't work, and so talk to us a little bit about how the type of entrepreneur business owner makes sense when you start talking about getting involved in podcast interviewing. I'll say for myself, it's worked wonders.
Absolutely.
So.
Well, I mean, first, like, in general, like service-based business owners are best to do podcast interviews and to see a real return on investment because as a service-based entrepreneur, whether you're a coach or a consultant or you have an agency, you're providing a service for people, your clients want to work with you because of your expertise and they work with you because they trust you. And one of the best ways that you can build trust with people and show your expertise is through podcast interviews because you're being asked questions. People are getting to know you, developing trust with you. So going on podcasts is a way to develop that trust and expertise. So definitely service-based business owners. And then also service-based business owners whose average lifetime value of a client is in the several thousands of dollars. And the reason that is because most podcast listeners are hearing you for the first time. You're a new person to them. Like most of them are not going to be ready to sign up and buy what you have right away. Now, every now and then you will get someone that maybe they've heard you on other podcasts. So then when they hear you on another one, they're like, okay, I've heard you. I've been thinking about working with you. And then that interview just sealed the deal because I heard you talk about XYZ, which made me know, like, I really want to work with you. So you want to know that, like, not every single listener is going to reach out and want to work with you because, remember, buyers buy when they're ready to buy. And they buy when the time is right for them. So when they hear your interview, might not be the right time, but maybe 6 months down the road, it is going to be the right time, which kind of leads me to my last point about, sorry, the phone. Which kind of brings me to my last point is that what you said, you really have to commit and look at this as a long-term process. I see all the time now, there's like these ads, like, oh, I'm going to show you how to get on like your favorite podcast. And this isn't about getting on one big podcast, and this isn't about just getting on a ton of podcasts in 3 months. This is a long-term process and a long-term strategy that should be a part of your marketing every month, year after year. So that way, when people hear you today and they're like, wow, I really love that, but it's not the right time, and they hear you again in a year from now after their business has transformed and now they're ready to work with you, you are still there. You are still showing up. So when people just think they can invest in a marketing strategy like podcast guesting for 3 months and see if it worked, you're totally missing the point. Because podcast listeners, they need to hear from you long term. You cannot expect for people to be ready when the time is that you decided to do podcast interviews.
Right, exactly. And so, I'll add a few things to that with you, Jessica. One is the replayability of podcasting is very critical because your episodes exist for a long time. And so they may have a instant kind of 30-day run where most people are listening to the episode and downloading it. But the beauty of podcasting is that you can go back at any point, pick up an episode, pick up certain parts of an episode, and that's huge for your longevity, like you mentioned, in terms of your sales cycle. So if you're someone that's got, whether it's a short sales cycle or even a longer sales cycle in your business, the opportunity for your particular episode to still be out there is then critical. Another piece, when you talk about podcast marketing is, and you mentioned about trust and likability. Those are the two key components of anybody doing anything with anybody, right? Whether it's business or personal relationships. And so you get the best chance to do that when people can hear you speak. Like if they can hear you speak, or if they can read you from your writing. Those are two great areas, and there's nothing like hearing a person speak to create that likability, that trust, that endearment. Because in today's society, you could probably agree with this, is that people look for your story behind things. They look for how can they connect with you at that personal level. How can they get a trust of who you are, and can you deliver on what you say you do? And then again, what's your story behind it? Right? What motivates you? Once you know what motivates a person, you can have an understanding of when they hit highs or lows, what's going to be their character, right? And so nothing like the spoken voice to be able to do that. And so I totally agree with you. And again, I love this because this is what I've seen in actually doing a podcast. It's helped my business. Because I get to share information and people get to know me where I can't do that for every single person I might interact with, whether it's social media or just around in person. But it's kind of been, in some cases, from a business standpoint, almost like my business kind of resume in a sense, where someone can go in and check out a podcast and after listening to a few episodes, get a pretty good sense of who I am and what I value and what I'm about. And then they can make a buying decision at that point a little faster. When we do actually meet, we've kind of closed that gap of kind of somewhat getting to know each other, and we can build a faster rapport that leads to hopefully a faster sales cycle of either deciding, yes, we're going to do business, no, we're not going to do business, or we're not going to do business right now, maybe at some point in the future. So. Yeah, so I think that service is great.
Yes, totally. And it's also, remember, podcasting is, probably the only medium where people can be consuming your content while doing other things. A video, if you're watching this, like, people are watching the video, right? It's kind of hard to multitask the video or, reading. Oh, what is happening here? I think I have to X out. Hold on. View for now. I started a watch party, and then it brought me to watching my own video, which was weird. Still learning how to use this. I was like, let me share it, to get more people watching it. But then it was like, oh, you want to watch yourself? Can't do that. Oh, no. Hold on a second. I don't.
Yeah. Well, Lauren.
Hold on, RJ. I think it's giving me feedback.
Is it?
Hold on a second.
Yes, you sound good on our end.
I am getting feedback on my end, so let me see what I can do about that.
Okay.
Hold on one sec. How do I do this? And okay, I think we're good again.
Is that better? We'll blame it on the weather.
All right. Hopefully that's better.
Yeah. So hey, listen, Jessica, one of our good brothers and good friends, Lawrence Thompson, who's a podcaster, says yes, it builds your social media credibility. Mm-hmm. And so, do you want to speak to that real quick? Because he brings up a good point about your kind of credibility in doing business and in all the noise with social media and everything. Mm-hmm. A lot of people, it's the barriers to entry of a lot of things are lower, and so sometimes, unfortunately, allows people to get into certain aspects of business where 10, 15, 20 years ago, the expense of it with time or money might have kept them out. Now they're in, and sometimes more unscrupulousness can get in to a particular industry. So can you speak to the credibility that podcast interviewing allows you?
Yes. Sorry, I'm still getting feedback and I don't know why. It's like the video was playing. Can I see if I can leave the broadcast and then rejoin it? Okay, hold on.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so we're going to have Jessica join back. We're going to see if we can get her feedback. And y'all know we do this podcast raw, so this is just like how business works. So there's no we're not going to fancy edit this out. This is everyday business. And so that's what we do. So we'll wait and see if Jessica can jump back on. But it's really some good information when you talk about podcast interviewing. And so let's see, yes. So we're going to bring Jessica back on, Jessica Rhodes with Interview Connections.
All right. Take 3.
All right. Is that better? All right. That quick pit stop.
Oh my God. Okay. All right. That's good.
Yep. Hey, that's part of Facebook Live. But hey, one of the things I was sharing with the audience is we do this podcast as a raw podcast. So there's no sexy editing or anything like that. I wanted to mimic business, right? So what we're talking about is real business. So there's no fancy Hollywood studio or anything like
exactly.
that. This is how business is. You don't get a chance.
This is an opportunity to see really what happens behind the scenes of podcasting, because podcasts are pre-recorded. They are edited. So by the time they make it to your ears, they have been polished.
Right. They've been nicely polished and everything, which is cool. I get that. But to me, this is what then separates it from radio, which is going to be TV, which is going to be highly polished and things are filtered and that sort of thing. And you can make yourself sound as great as you want, right? Or at least what the technology allows you to do. I like being raw in the sense that I like not that you can't be authentic when you edit, but I like for people to see exactly what goes on. And in business, you have to overcome challenges and distractions and still continue to go. And I look at it the same way, like if you're up publicly speaking, right? When you get up and you do public speaking, you don't get the chance to edit. You don't get the chance to stop and rewind. You don't get to splice and add anything in or take anything out.
Yes.
It is what it is once you say it. And so that helps you level up. But speak a little bit, Jessica, about the credibility.
So this is huge because, and this really goes, so people look at this, you can kind of look at this one or two ways. There is credibility when you get booked on a really big show, right? Like one of the big name shows. Like I was on Glambition Radio with Allie Brown, which is a huge podcast for successful female entrepreneurs. So just being on that show is huge credibility. But you have to remember, most people are not going to get themselves, you're not going to get booked on these huge shows with tens of thousands of listeners. And that's not what it's all about, right? There is credibility in the number of shows that you're getting booked on. So when you have a lead who sees, finds you and is, kind of doing some research to see if you're a good fit, when they Google you and see that you've been interviewed on all these podcasts, that's credibility right there. So even if those are newer shows or smaller shows, just seeing that you are getting booked consistently on podcasts is sending a message that you are an expert that people want to hear from and that people want to talk to.
Yeah, exactly. No, I
Mm-hmm.
couldn't agree with that more. And so that's something I've been able to do. I think other people, and Lawrence, thank you for that statement and that feedback, because he's right. It does help with the credibility, and that goes so much further in being able to do business with people today. Um, you know, when you look at, let's just talk about launching your podcast, because you're a podcaster, Jessica, and you've
Mm-hmm.
launched several podcasts very successfully and have great guests and great content. I encourage people at the end we're going to share your information on how people can connect with you and hear your podcast. But um, talk about the launch of a podcast and some things that people should be mindful of, because some people are interested in podcasting. They're interested in maybe revamping their current podcast. And so, for those that are interested in launch, what are a few things that they should be mindful
So I think you want to, when you're launching a podcast, you definitely want to think about the launch, and you want to be mindful and really crafting like a good, crafting a podcast, like looking at the title, the artwork, what's the show going to be about, who's the target audience. Like, you want to think about all that. But I think a big pitfall that a lot of new podcasters make is they think all about the launch, and they don't really think about the, it's sort of like, when you get married and you like put all of this effort into the wedding, or when you have a baby and you like research for 9 months about your labor, and then you realize, oh, that was one day, and now I have like, the rest of my life with this. So you, just like with a podcast, like your launch, like that's one event, like
right.
that's the launch. But the podcast is ultimately going to be something that goes on for hopefully years in your business. So you do want to think about like, a lot of people go into a launch like, I'm going to launch, 30 episodes, and then I'm going to do it daily for 3 months because that's going to get me the most listeners. But really, like, ask yourself, can you keep up with that? Is that sustainable? And is that what your audience wants? Because not everyone wants to listen to a podcast every single day or 3 times a week, So
Right.
you want to think about the long-term play of it all and really make sure you have systems in place. And this is so huge, because this is really what holds most people back from succeeding with their podcast, is they get overwhelmed with all of the tasks that they need to do to get their show out there, and they're afraid to invest and delegate in getting certain stuff done, whether it's editing or booking the guests or scheduling or creating the post to promote the show. Like, there's a lot of steps if you want to do this right and do it successfully for your business. So you do have to be prepared to really invest and delegate, or have very clear systems in place to make sure everything is getting done.
Yep, definitely. Our guest today, Jessica Rhodes, founder and co-owner of Interview Connections. What are, Jessica, some best practices for those that are hearing this information and it may be new to them? They're hearing it for the first time. They've thought of launching a podcast, but they never thought of being a guest on a podcast and how they would do that. What are some best practices for them? Obviously, they can reach out and connect with you, but even in prepping to do that, what stage of their business should they be in? I mean, if they're, they just started yesterday, are they, ready to be a guest on a podcast? What's kind of maybe if there's a rule of thumb for those that are
Yeah, I would recommend waiting until you're past the 6-figure mark in your business, or you've been doing it for, a little while. Like, I would not do this right away, because so much changes when you're first getting started. You're figuring out your price points, you're figuring out your messaging, you're figuring out who your ideal potential client is. And remember, the benefit, the double-edged sword of podcast interviews is that these interviews are going to be online forever. And like, you don't want to go on a podcast your first day of being in business with a message that may be completely different in a year. So I think that's just something to consider. I don't want to say, like, if you're brand new, don't do this, because you might be knowing exactly what your message is and like get out there in a big way right away. Like, why wait? But just be mindful of that. Like, if you're getting started and you are still figuring out what market's the right fit for you, what your service looks like, you want to make sure that your message is really clear. And we have actually an episode of our podcast. It's our podcast called Rock the Podcast. And it's an episode with Kelly O'Neill, who's a branding expert, and she gives actually some very clear questions to answer to get clear on what your message is. So you want to figure that out before you then start marketing your business.
Right. No, exactly. I definitely agree with that. And so, what are just overall for business owners in general, Jessica, what are 2 or 3 best practices? I always like to ask that. You know what? Matter of fact, before I ask that, one of my favorite questions I always like to ask anybody interview on this podcast is, take me back to your most challenged day in this business. Did you have a day, and I'm talking about one day, you may have had more.
There's one day that I don't think I can talk about publicly.
Right. Take me back. Did you have a day where you almost gave up on this? And I think about that and it's compelling me because getting into an industry that hasn't been fully vetted, like we talked about earlier, can be a challenge. I started a co-working business here in Memphis at a time when co-working was basically coastal, and I had to do a lot of educating, and I grossly underestimated the investment I would have to do to educate people on what it is and what it's not, right? And that was a great learning experience for me on a number of different fronts. Did you have a day where you almost said, man, forget this, I'm going to go back to doing X, Y, and Z? And if you did, what compelled you to keep going, when you face that hard obstacle?
Yeah. So honestly, the moment there was one day I can remember very clearly. I was pregnant with my second child. So I don't know if I can just blame this on hormones, but I was pregnant with my daughter Lucy. So I was I had a baby. Or my son was probably like a year and a half, 2 years old, which means my business was a year and a half to 2 years old because we started them at the same time. And things were growing. Like I maybe had like a small team of VAs. So the business was growing and there was like work to be done, but I was so exhausted and I just I really need like Bluetooth headphones. I'm so sorry. So I was so exhausted. I just remember calling my dad in tears, just being like, I just don't want to do this anymore. Like, I'm so tired. I'm so stressed. Like, instead of having one job, I felt like instead of having like one boss, I felt like I had 20 or however many clients I had. Like I felt like I had these handcuffs and I was like, oh my God, what did I get myself into? So that was like a hard time, but I think It was really just the exhaustion of being pregnant and like having like a growing business. Like we were reaching like 6 figures at that point and I was like very overwhelmed, but I think what kept me going was getting into the second trimester and getting more energy, to be completely honest.
So just that evolution down the pathway in terms of grooming
like having
a young one,
having a new growing business and being pregnant is like very, very difficult.
And you know what? We could probably do a whole podcast just on that.
It's a lot. I'm glad my kids are older now.
Yeah, I couldn't even imagine. I've got 3 daughters, and I can remember doing business when they were younger. They're 9, 8, and 6 now. But I can remember doing business when they were younger. And of course, me being the guy, that's a complete different thing. You ladies have it completely different.
Absolutely.
But I can remember that being a challenge. So it sounds like you just kind of kept in it. I mean, obviously you had to go through that, but it just sounds like you just had the fortitude just to keep going and not get out. And that's something I share with business owners all the time is sometimes you just have to bow up and just keep going. Because a lot of success is just showing up and providing a value, but sometimes you have to just outlast people. And sometimes that's just what takes you to that next
absolutely
step.
I mean, I remember, and that is like just dedicating yourself to it and sticking with it even through the hard times. Like when I first started bringing on a team and hiring employees, like it was very, very difficult. And I've had competitors over the years who start, and usually when you start podcast booking, you start as a freelancer, and then if you want to continue to grow, you really bring on a team, or you stay at that level where you're a freelancer. And I've had a number of people who start doing it and then they stop when they get to the point where they're like, oh God, I don't want to turn into like an agency. But sticking with it long term is part of why we're so successful, is that we haven't given up and we've continued to build and nurture our, basically network of podcasters that we work with.
Yep, definitely. And so, Jessica, what do you see next for you and next for Interview Connections? What's, as you continue to expand, what's next? What do you see on the horizon, for your company?
So really what we have coming down the pipeline is a lot more consulting for our clients, because we've really dialed in getting our clients booked on really great podcasts. And now we're going to be, rolling out more opportunities to do consulting with us to help you leverage the interview appearances that you're getting, because it's not just getting on a great show and doing a great interview, but it's really how to be a better guest, how to really effectively convert business from podcast interviews. So we do consulting calls, like our manager does strategy calls with our clients. I do consulting calls with clients at our higher levels, and we'll be rolling out a program in 2020 where you can get monthly consulting ongoing as we're getting you booked.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it definitely sounds good. So in the show notes, people will be able to see your contact information. I encourage everybody in YB community to go to interviewconnections.com. That's interviewconnections.com. You can connect with Jessica. Her email address, jessica@interviewconnections.com. Connect with her on social media, on Facebook, the Interview Connections page. You see tagged into this Facebook Live. On Twitter @JessRhodesBiz. That's @JessRhodesBiz. And on Instagram, Interview Connections on Instagram. Make sure you connect with her there as well. So let me end. I was going to ask this earlier and I got into some other questions. And so just to kind of wrap up with you, Jessica, what are just, best practices from you, Jessica? You've launched a successful business. You've got a beautiful family. I think that appeals to a lot of people, but you've endured a lot of the challenges that come with that and been able to experience the success. And so for others who want to get there, who are aspiring, they may be at work right now, they may be at home, looking to get their business kind of off the ground. We all face different obstacles that come with that. What are 2 or 3 best practices that you'd like to share with people that are looking to level up today?
Well, number one, always be working to develop yourself, both in your business and personally. One of the things that has helped us grow the most is going through Landmark, which is a personal development and leadership program. It's very transformational. So we did that in 2018. My business partner and I and our manager and some of our employees have done it as well. And so really focusing on personal development has been huge. So that is the best practice I would highly recommend. And then always investing in yourself too, but being calculated about your investments, because there are investments that you need to take a risk on. Like you're not always going to be able to look into a glass ball and know that, I'm going to get XYZ out of this investment. So you want to be strategic and know like what you're investing in, but you also need to take risks. I think some people don't grow because they're afraid and they can't guarantee the results. So then they don't take risks and they stay small. So you have to make investments, you have to take risks and be calculated about it.
Right, exactly. I think that's a great way to sum that up, Jessica, because you have to take those calculated risks. Everything's going to be a risk, right? Whether you're at work, whether you start a job, whether you moonlight, whether you do side hustle, whatever it is, at some point you're going to have to take some calculated risk. And so you have to be willing and you have to have the courage to then go and do that. Because like you say, everything's not this sure bet. And things that even are successful started out as very unsure and, people really didn't know. They just had to step out and try it. And you could name just about any business with that. Even at some point, some person at some point had to say, for Jessica and Ron to one day be doing a Facebook Live from their cell phones. If you tell somebody that in 1995, they're going to be, what?
Yeah.
In 2000, they say, what? In 2005,
Yeah.
they would say, what? And in 2010, they would say, what? But so here we are, you know, and it's continued to expand. And so I appreciate you sharing that, because I think people can relate to that and really take that with them. And so, listen, Jessica, thank you so much for taking time out today. I know that you're busy. There's a lot of things going on. Your business is continuing to grow. So for you to take time out and put up with me here on
Well,
Facebook
thank you for
Live,
being patient with me. I feel
appreciate
a little responsible for some of the glitches, but what are you going to do, you know? Roll with the
Hey,
punches.
they happen. Yeah, they happen. But listen, we got through it, so that's what counts. And so thank you so much.
Thanks,
I hope to
Ron.
remain connected with you. We continue the podcast, and best wishes to you and your family.
All right. Thanks so much. Bye.
All right. Thanks. We'll see you later. Bye-bye. All right, y'all. Thank you so much to Jessica Rhodes for joining on today on the Minding Your Business podcast. Shout out to my guy, Dominic Lawson, owner of Owls LLC, along with his great wife, Kenda, for them to do what they're doing with Owls LLC and what he's doing with the Startup Life podcast, which is the flagship podcast of the Binge Podcast Network. So I hope that you took a lot from what Jessica had to share and what she provided, the insight in terms of podcast interviewing. I hope that's something that if your business has reached a certain level where you believe that there's value in podcast interviewing and marketing, I hope that you allow those of us that have shows on the Binge to have you come on and connect with Jessica, because she's got a network of shows all around the country that you can get connected with. And I'm telling you right now, is a great way for you to endear yourself with your target market, to be able to achieve the goals that you'd like to achieve at a much less cost than many other marketing platforms or avenues. So listen, chat Ron, the Minding Your Business podcast, episode number 114. Check us out on any of the major podcast networks, as well as on the mybpodcast.com, more exclusive content and the sort. So listen, thank you everybody that's on Spreaker.com, everybody that's on Facebook.com. Come back. I got another great episode coming next week while I'll be traveling in the great state of Nebraska as well as the great state of Iowa. We'll be bringing you another guest on episode number 115. But listen, thank y'all. Have a great weekend. October 25th, it's a Friday. This year's winding down. What you gonna do? Champ Ron.
What we do here is go back.
Loud.